Hey guys, if you were born a barefoot Irish monk in the 7th century, well, you probably wouldn't survive your own baptism, let alone the first frosty winter on that mist-cloaked coastline of early medieval Éire. You arrive squinting into a world carved by wind and prayer, where stone huts huddle against relentless rains, and the scent of peat smoke clings to everything. Even babies like you, tiny, squirming and ruddy with cold. There are no cribs, no warm linen blankets, no lullabies outside of whispered psalms, just the sharp cry of gulls overhead and the lowing of cows in the distance. You're swaddled in coarse wool that scratches your skin and placed in a straw-lined cradle beside a turf fire, its warmth weak but precious, flickering against damp stone walls. You weigh perhaps 6 pounds, with wide-set eyes and tufts of dark hair slick from the womb. Your mother, quiet and broad-shouldered, wraps you tightly and says little. She's done this before. Your father, a fisherman who also tends sheep and sometimes cuts peat from the bogs, stands at the door, peering out into the grey light with a look that mixes awe with practicality. He knows this world is not easy. But you, child of wind and ash, are born into a people who endure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first days are measured not by hours, but by cries. Your own and the low chanting of monks who pass through your village. Faces shrouded by hoods, carrying staffs and satchels of scripture. They come seeking rest and alms, and in exchange, they speak of God, of silence, of something called salvation, which sounds suspiciously like walking barefoot for years. You're too young to care, but your father kneels as they pass. When you're 3, you fall into a tide pool. It's freezing and full of seaweed, crabs, and little slippery fish that tickle your arms. Your mother hauls you out by your tunic and scolds you in Gaelic while hugging you tight. That night, she wraps your feet in sheepskin and whispers a prayer in the old tongue, the one not even the monks write down. She's afraid. Not of death, but of losing you to the sea. The same way she lost her brother, who left long ago with a book and never came back. You grow up among roundhouses made of stone and thatch, clustered together like damp mushrooms. There's no road, only trails trodden down by sheep, dogs, and bare human feet. The air always smells like wet grass, smoke, and salt. Your fingers are chapped from pulling brambles out of hedges. Your knees always green or muddy. When it rains, which it always does, you hide under a wooden cart and pretend it's a ship, sailing to a place where the sky is blue and dry. Sometimes you glimpse the distant glow of the monastery, perched on the hillside like a lantern of stone. At night, you hear their bells, dull and haunting, echoing over the hills. They sound both comforting and ominous, like something half asleep that remembers everything. Your 5th winter is especially harsh. One of your siblings dies. No one speaks of it directly, but the silence in the cottage is heavier than the snow. You sit near the hearth, legs drawn to your chest, watching flames lick blackened iron. You start repeating lines you've heard the monks say. be still and know. The rest you don't remember, but it feels sacred. Your father hears you and nods. You begin to mimic the monks, not because you understand, but because they seem untouchable, clean in a world of muck, dry in a land of endless damp. They carry scrolls and bound books, their fingers stained with ink, their robes heavy with damp wool and mystery. One of them, Brother Thiran, gives you a wink and a dried fig. You bite into it, expecting meat, and nearly gag. He laughs silently. On your 6th birthday, if such a thing exists in your village, your mother gives you a pouch of dried heather and a kiss on the forehead. Your father pats your shoulder, which is how he says, "I love you." That night, the monk returns, not Kairan, but someone older, his beard stiff with sea salt, his hands calloused, yet oddly clean. He speaks with your parents while you watch from a crack in the door. The next morning, you are bathed in cold water, scrubbed with a mix of sand and lye, and dressed in a clean but shapeless tunic. Your mother braids a bit of cord around your wrist and tells you to be good, to listen, and to remember home, even if you never return. You walk beside the monk along the trail toward the monastery. The path is lined with gorse and stones and silence. Your bare feet hurt by the time you reach the gate. The monk knocks 3 times. A narrow door opens. A younger monk, not much older than your oldest cousin, ushers you in. You are now part of something larger, something quieter, and something much colder. The monastery is damp, yes, but it smells different. Less of goats, more of ink, smoke, and boiled cabbage. You are shown your sleeping space, a straw mat beside a wall, your blanket thin, but better than none. They don't speak much. They gesture, and you follow. You eat barley mush. You kneel. You listen to prayers sung in Latin, a language you don't yet know, but find beautiful anyway. You are given a wooden cross and told to hold it when you feel afraid. The night is black as pitch. The wind howls like a creature outside. But inside, there is a candle glowing beside a holy book, and the flickering light dances across words you cannot read. You are 7. You are cold, but you are beginning. Your new family doesn't look like much of a family at first. The monks are silent most of the time, their eyes sunken and their cheeks wind-chapped, as though the weather itself has been trying to erase their features over years of rain and frost. But as you shuffle through the cloister for the 100th time, you start to sense the rhythm beneath the quiet, the soft coughs that signal prayer, the way Brother Coleman always scratches his ear before turning a page, the low whistle Father Finton lets out whenever someone's spilled ink on vellum again. No one smiles often, but you notice how they pass bread to one another without speaking, how they tuck extra moss under someone's mat when the wind gets too fierce. You start to understand that love here wears thick robes and speaks in silence. Your feet, still pink and soft from childhood, have begun to harden, the skin thickening with each barefoot step across gravel, mud, and the occasional sheep pellet. At home, your mother would have wrapped them in old linen on cold mornings. Here, the cold is something you are taught to embrace. When you whimper from the icy stones beneath your bed mat, Brother Odran places a hand gently on your shoulder and simply says, suffering clears the fog. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you whisper it into the darkness anyway. And it helps. Your daily routine settles in like fog on a hill, soft but persistent. You wake before the sun, roused by a bell that clangs like a goat running into a bronze pan. You kneel until your knees go numb, then you eat porridge that somehow tastes both watery and burnt. You clean the floor with a bundle of reeds, even when the floor is mostly mud. Then, when the sun begins to warm the stones, or at least tries to, you sit at a desk made of driftwood and prayer, and begin to learn your letters. The script is Latin, though you still dream in Gaelic. The ink smells like vinegar and regret. Your first letters wobble across the page like ants that have had too much communion wine. Still, Brother Éire pats your head gently when you manage to write Deus without smudging it. He smells faintly of dried fish and damp wool, but you don't mind. That smell has come to mean kindness. During rest periods, of which there are suspiciously few, you sometimes get to walk the outer perimeter of the monastery garden, barefoot as always, feeling the soil shift between your toes. You are not allowed to talk, but you hum quietly to yourself, a half-remembered tune from your village. You don't know the words anymore, but the rhythm of it matches the wind through the heather. One time, Brother Éire hears you and hums the harmony. You don't make eye contact, but you feel warmth spread through your chest, like fresh porridge that hasn't been overcooked. Your parents visit once, only once. You're 10, and you almost don't recognize your father without the weight of a net on his back. Your mother's hands are rougher now, and she hugs you with a kind of caution, as though afraid she'll knock the monk out of you. They bring a single boiled egg and a piece of cloth sewn with little birds. You don't have anywhere to put it, so you hide it under your mat and take it out at night to stroke the stitches with your thumb. Books, you're told, are the closest thing to eternal life. Not that you'll live forever, of course, but what you copy might. That idea both thrills and terrifies you. Imagine misspelling God and having that error copied by generations of equally chilly monks for the next 300 years. That's a lot of pressure on a 12-year-old who still forgets to wash behind his ears. The monastery itself creaks and groans like an old man. The stone walls weep water. Moss creeps along the mortar like it's trying to convert the whole building back into a hill. The scriptorium, where you now spend much of your waking life, is brighter than the dormitory, with high slits in the walls that let in a kind of grey light that makes everything look half-finished. The desks are arranged in a circle, so no one can see what anyone else is doing without obviously peeking, which of course you sometimes do. Especially when Brother Lactana decorates the margins with little animals wearing bishop hats. He swears it helps him focus. No one's sure if he's joking. Meals are quiet and always the same. Bread, broth, sometimes a pickled thing you try not to examine too closely. But once a month, you get fish. Real fish. Caught from the nearby river and grilled over an actual flame. The monks pretend not to enjoy it, but everyone chews a little slower on fish night. You're still not allowed shoes. You ask why once, whispering the question to Brother Yunnan as you both wash ink pots in freezing water. He doesn't scold you, just shrugs and says, "The earth is God's. Might as well feel it while we're here." You can't argue with that, mostly because your teeth are chattering. Not everything is solemn. On St. Bridget's Day, someone leaves butter on your mat. You don't know who. It's the most delicious thing you've ever tasted. On the feast of St. Cuthbert, the monks play a game involving pebbles, sticks, and shouting, but only with their eyes. You don't understand the rules, but you win somehow. You get extra porridge. Burnt again, but victory porridge tastes better. At 13, you begin to copy texts in earnest. Real texts. Not just the alphabet over and over. You're given a psalter, and though your hands tremble as you dip the quill into the ink, you steady them with deep breaths and a whisper. Suffering clears the fog. You've come full circle. The words flow slowly. Every letter must be perfect. The parchment is unforgiving. One mistake and the entire sheet may be scraped clean and reused, or worse, ruined. But you find peace in the rhythm of it, in the scratching of the quill, in the tiny world you build with each line. You forget your feet are numb. You forget your back aches. You forget the outside world exists at all. And so, without quite realizing it, you've become one of them, a quiet, barefoot, ink-stained vessel for scripture, a brother of vellum and wind. You don't remember the exact moment when you began to belong, but one day, in the quiet hush of early morning, when the bells hadn't yet rung, and the world was still blanketed in the soft blue light of dawn, you noticed that your breath matched the breath of the brothers kneeling beside you, that your heartbeat no longer raced with the panic of youth, and that your hands, once unsure and clumsy, now found the margins of a vellum page without fumbling. You had grown into this life of discipline and stillness, as one grows into a thick woolen robe, first stiff and itchy, then strangely comforting, like a shell. The monastery had shaped you, gently but firmly, like the tide-shaped stones, each day wearing down the sharpness of your impatience, polishing your silence, sanding your boyhood into monastic quietude. You had learned the rhythm of the liturgical hours, their Latin names rolling over your tongue like dry bread. Matins in the dead of night, Lauds with the cock's crow, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. They cut the day into sacred slices, and you lived inside those slices like a monk-shaped crumb. Your tasks became more advanced. You were assigned to clean and trim parchment, that strange knot paper made from the stretched and scraped skin of calves or sheep, soft as a whisper, smooth as a river rock. It smelled faintly of old barns and holy intent. You learned to cut it with a curved blade, to smooth it with pumice, to prick its edges with an awl and thread to guide your lines. Each sheet, precious and stubborn, held the ghost of the animal it had been. You said a silent prayer for each one. The ink-making became part of your duties too. You mashed oak galls in a stone mortar, mixing them with iron salts and wine or vinegar, until they darkened to the rich brown black that would stain parchment forever. If you added too much vinegar, the ink would eat the page in a slow, acidic revenge. If you added too little, it would fade like breath on glass. Finding the balance was, according to Brother Ruadan, a spiritual discipline. He said that ink was like humility. deepest when most controlled. Sometimes you prepared your own quills. The best came from the outer flight feathers of a goose, taken in winter when the shafts were firm. You'd harden them by heating the tips in sand, then cut them at a steep angle, carefully shaping the nib with a tiny penknife until it could hold just enough ink to glide without blotting. You tested them on scraps, drawing loops and crosses and the occasional tiny fish, before nodding solemnly and dipping them into the dark ink pot with the reverence of a priest handling relics. All this happened in the scriptorium, a long room smelling of vellum, soot, and beeswax. The light was always a little dim, filtered through narrow slits in the stone walls. You sat at your angled desk on a stool that grew less comfortable each day, with your parchment before you, your ink and knife and pumice stone close at hand. Around you, other monks scratched and scribbled and breathed in a collective hush, broken only by the occasional creak of a stool or the soft swear of someone who had just smeared an entire line of gospel with the side of their hand. You learned to illuminate as well, not just copy. Illumination meant art. Gold leaf pressed carefully onto glue-like gesso, forming letters that caught the light like a halo. Fantastical beasts curling into the loops of capitals. Vines and flowers climbing the margins like the ivy outside your cell. Brother Lakhna showed you how to make green from verdigris, how to grind lapis lazuli for blue, when you could get it, which was rare and expensive, how to prepare red from madder root or crushed beetles. Sometimes, when no one was watching, you gave your saints secret smiles, or gave your angels freckled cheeks like your own. One day, Brother Sanan praised your elegant uncials, and though he said it in a tone that made it sound like a mild scolding, your chest swelled with pride. Uncial script, the rounded and stately hand used for Latin texts, was tricky, easy to wobble, hard to master. Your lines had grown steady. Your spacing was clean. Your capital letters were starting to look like they'd been born on the page rather than dragged into it. Of course, not everything was ink and grace. There were blisters from walking without shoes, even in snow. There were lice, which no amount of humility seemed to deter. There were arguments about theology, muttered between coughs and scrubbing sessions. Brother Kiran insisted that copying the same psalm thrice in a row improved one's soul. Brother Éire argued it simply improved callus formation. You didn't take sides, mostly because your wrist hurt too much to care. Still, there was beauty in it. The quiet, the way the afternoon sun warmed a single corner of the scriptorium wall, the hush that fell over the refectory as everyone bowed their heads before a meal, the peace that came unannounced as you shaped each letter on the page. It was a slow peace, the kind that crept up on you like fog on the moor, unexpected but complete. Sometimes, during Compline, when the last prayers of the day were whispered and the fire burned low, you would find yourself staring at the tiny bookshelf in the corner of the chapel. It held maybe 20 books, fewer than a modern toddler's picture shelf. But to you, they were treasures beyond imagining. You had helped copy 2 of them. Your hands, your ink, your sweat. They would outlive you, maybe by centuries. That thought made your breath catch in your throat, like a hiccup of eternity. You never questioned the barefoot rule again. Your souls had toughened. You could walk across brambles without flinching. You liked the way you could feel the earth, the grit of sand, the softness of moss, the chill of frost. It reminded you constantly that you were part of the world, not separate from it. You were 15 now. Your hands were stained with ink, your shoulders perpetually hunched, your face mostly hidden by a hood that smelled of sheep and ash. You had not seen your parents in years. You no longer missed them in the way you once had. Their absence had become part of your rhythm, like a rest in a chant. And yet, on the eve of your first great journey, a barefoot pilgrimage across Europe to carry books and seek more, you found yourself fingering the scrap of cloth your mother had given you, long ago, still hidden under your mat. The little embroidered birds were faded, but still visible. You whispered a prayer, not from any book, and slept without dreams. The morning of your departure comes not with fanfare or trumpets, but with the soft, monotonous tolling of the chapel bell, echoing through the cloisters like a reminder more than a call, reminding you that today is like all days, sacred and mundane, dust-covered and divine, but also somehow entirely different, because today you begin walking into the unknown with no sandals, no map, no guarantee of safe shelter beyond the abbey gate. Only trust in your feet, your faith, and the worn pages strapped tightly to your chest. You dress in silence, layering your robe over your simple woolen tunic, the fabric smelling of last night's smoke and forever of sheep, tugging the cowl low over your hairless scalp while your fingers tremble, not from fear, at least not only fear, but from something else, something softer and harder to name, a combination of reverence and responsibility. Because you're not just leaving, you're carrying a book, a hand-copied Gospel of John, illuminated with such care that even the marginal doodles of curling ivy and backward griffins seem to breathe. And that book is as sacred as any relic, possibly more so, since relics only remember the dead, and books remember everything. Brother Lackner, older, thinner, and sharper than any blade in the abbey's humble kitchen, hands you a bag of dried fish, 3 round oatcakes wrapped in parchment, and a cloth pouch of ink just in case. Though he shakes his head as he gives it, muttering that if you spill it, you'll look like a pen exploded in your ribs, and he wouldn't put it past you. You smile nervously. He does not. You're not alone. Brother Aud, whose voice always seems like it's about to start singing, whether it's a prayer or just asking for salt, walks beside you. So does Brother Dalan, silent and enormous, his hands thick as tree roots, who used to be a blacksmith before he saw a vision in a forge flame and came here barefoot. The 3 of you make an odd trinity, one wiry, one weighty, and you, still hovering between boy and monk, your feet already sore just from standing in the morning dew. The abbey gate creaks open, slow as a century. No one claps, no one weeps. A few brothers murmur prayers. Brother Ruadan gives a solemn nod and disappears before the gate even finishes swinging. That's how it always is. You're not going on a hero's journey. You're not off to find dragons or crowns. You're simply walking to another monastery across the sea with a book that might be needed, copied, traded, preserved, or hidden. That's what Irish monks do. The ground is cold. Of course it is. Wet too, the way only an Irish morning in spring can be, where even the birds seem mildly soggy, and the wind carries a kind of sarcastic bite. Your feet sink slightly into the mud, then rise with a soft squelch. Behind you, the abbey disappears around a bend, tucked behind the hill and the mist. Ahead, everything is damp fields and low stone walls, and the thin grey path winding toward the coastline, where your journey will cross not just land, but water. By midday, your feet are less pink and more brown, caked in a mosaic of mud, moss, and cow dung that you've stopped trying to avoid. Our order sings softly, mostly psalms, sometimes old Irish laments, whose meanings have long faded into pure sound. Dalan doesn't speak, but once he gently pulls you away from a nettle patch, before you step blindly into it, you nod your thanks. He nods back. That's how conversation goes out here. When you pass villages, you keep your heads bowed and your pace steady. Some villagers are curious, children especially, who gawk at your bare feet and whisper to one another like you've stepped out of a story. Others avert their eyes, either out of reverence or suspicion. A few make the sign of the cross. One woman throws a turnip. It misses. Barely. By evening, you find a mossy patch near a stream and settle in. There is no fire. Too risky, too visible. But Dalan offers a woolen blanket, which smells worse than he does. And Aud pulls out a chunk of slightly stale cheese he found, which you don't question. You unwrap the book. Not fully, just enough to check for dampness. It's dry. You whisper a prayer of thanks. Then another for your feet. Sleep comes slowly. The stars are pinpricks in a damp black curtain, and the sounds of frogs and rustling grasses form a sort of lullaby that is both comforting and vaguely threatening, like being rocked to sleep in a cradle hung above wolves. You dream of nothing, or maybe just pages turning without end. The days blur quickly into a rhythm of trudging, begging, blessing, and aching. You walk from village to village, sometimes allowed to sleep in barns, sometimes under hedges, always moving east, always carrying the book. You offer prayers in exchange for food, and more often than not, people give you scraps. Potatoes, turnips, stale bread, sometimes a heel of bacon so old it's become its own saint. One day, Aud develops a limp, his right ankle swelling like a boiled onion. You pause for 3 days beside a stream, wrapping the ankle in cool moss and praying more fervently than usual. On the second night, Dalan pulls out a small bottle of oil he'd hidden in his robe and massages Aud's ankle in silence. You realize then that not all healing is spiritual, and not all monks follow the rules as strictly as they claim. Onward. You cross into territory that no longer smells like peat smoke, but like different fires. Pine, fir, strange herbs you don't know the names of. The language changes too. People speak a rougher Latin, or some blend of it with the local tongue, and Aud begins translating slowly, his accent drawing out smiles and confusion. You rely more and more on gestures, pointing to the cross around your neck, holding up the book reverently, bowing your head. It works, most of the time. Once it doesn't. A village elder accuses you of witchcraft when Dalan's snoring terrifies a goat into fainting. You flee before sunrise. The landscape shifts. Less green, more golden. Fields grow wider, towns more frequent. Roads turn to cobblestone, then to something resembling real paving. You find yourself marveling at the strange straightness of Roman roads that still cling to the continent like scars, cutting through forests with a stubborn logic. Your feet hate them. Stones wedge between your toes. Every step is an argument with geometry. Still, you walk. Because the book must reach another monastery. Because you promised. Because you've copied too many letters by candlelight to let them vanish now. You are a monk. You are a traveler. You are a footsore whisper in the long memory of books. By now, your feet have taken on the texture of old bark, calloused in odd places, cracked in others, with that peculiar stiffness that comes not from sudden injury, but from the slow, relentless wear of days and days of barefoot travel across moor, mud, and rock. Each step less of a motion and more of a low conversation between your skin and the world beneath it. A conversation that grows ever more blunt, ever more resigned. And sometimes, when stepping on an acorn or a sharp gravel chip, unexpectedly loud in its complaints, you remember what the abbot told you before you left. His bony fingers clasped around a chipped wooden cup of nettle tea. His breath smelling of onions and old Latin, saying quite casually that shoes were unnecessary for a true servant of God. That each pain you feel in your souls is a reminder of your dependence, of your pilgrimage, of your humility. Only the vain protect themselves too well, he had muttered, wiping ink from his robe like it was wine, and then added, "Besides, Jesus wore sandals, but John the Baptist didn't. So, no sandals for you. Not even the thin leather foot wraps that some of the continental monks wear in secret. You walk on whatever terrain God or local livestock have left in your path, be it soft loam, icy puddles, or the unyielding gravel of forgotten Roman roads, where each stone is like a frozen pebble of penance lodged beneath your toes, ready to remind you that the work of a scribe doesn't end when the ink dries, but continues across fields, through rain, and sometimes even under suspicious glares from locals who can't quite decide whether you're holy or insane. You begin to walk differently. You learn to step lightly, even when the earth is unkind, to favor your heel less and your outer sole more, to angle your feet away from sharp things, like an animal crossing an unfamiliar trail. You develop a peculiar shuffle, not quite a limp, not quite a stride, something in between, like the silent hesitation of a man who knows that every stone may be his undoing, but walks anyway. There's a joke among monks, though no one ever laughs when they tell it. The first sign of holiness is blood in the footprints. And though you'd never admit it out loud, especially not in front of Dalan or Out, you've left more than one small red smudge along a roadside, where a blister tore or a sharp reed caught you off guard. Each one like a miniature martyrdom, not glorious or even very painful, just inconveniently holy. And yet the strangeness is, you feel freer like this. With no shoes to shield you, no leather barrier between you and the mud, you begin to notice things. Textures, temperatures, transitions from warm stone to cool grass. The faint difference between sheep-trodden trails and the open scrubland. You become a sensor of the earth itself. You can tell when a village is near because the dirt grows harder, flatter, compressed by carts and cloven hooves. You sense rivers before you see them. The way the ground softens, drinks more, squishes differently beneath your feet. You learn that moss is kind and dry pine needles are tricksters, and that rabbit droppings, though unpleasant, are far more tolerable than goose ones. The others watch you with a mixture of amusement and concern. Aud, ever the singer, starts composing a ballad about the monk whose feet grew wiser than his tongue. And you let him, because you know that as long as he's singing, he's not limping anymore. Dalan just grunts occasionally, probably judging you for not walking faster. Though you've noticed he's begun shifting more to the grass than the gravel too. You suspect he's imitating your barefoot technique without admitting it. One evening, you reach a fork in the road. There's a stone marker etched with Latin so worn, it reads more like a riddle than a direction. One path is wide, clear, and lined with apple trees, blooming pink and white. The other is narrow, muddy, descending into a ravine full of buzzing things and mossy silence. Aodig immediately suggests the wider path. Dalan, with his instinct for gloom, eyes the ravine. You crouch, press your hand to the dirt at both trailheads, and feel a strange pull in your gut, like the ravine is whispering the word Abatia. Faint, but there. You take the muddy way. They follow. You end up at a hidden chapel in a glade, long abandoned, but still full of beeswax smell and candle stubs. Its altar untouched, its roof mostly whole, and in the corner, half buried in dust and ivy, a single book, wet at the corners, faded but legible, a copy of the Psalms in careful Irish majuscule. You cradle it like a bird. Dalan nods. IODH sings a hymn without words. You wrap the book beside your own, and that night you sleep better than you have in weeks, with the sacred weight of pages against your ribs, and the soft, wet earth forgiving your tired souls. From then on, the journey becomes less about walking and more about listening. To your feet, to the wind, to the way the land speaks when you're quiet enough. Some days the path vanishes completely, and you must choose your way, by instinct, by the direction of moss on stones, or the shape of clouds moving overhead. You're not afraid. Or you are, but gently so, the way one is afraid before entering a cold stream, shivering at the edges, but knowing that stepping in is the only way forward. In one village, a boy points to your feet and asks in Frankish accented Latin if you are too poor for shoes. You laugh. No, you reply, I'm too rich in humility. He frowns, not understanding. His mother gives you a piece of sausage anyway. Sometimes you wonder what your feet would say if they could speak. Would they beg for relief? Would they curse the abbot's rule? Or would they simply hum, content in their strange, aching duty, having carried not just your body, but your belief across miles of thorns and thistle? Eventually, even you begin to forget what softness feels like. Grass feels rough. Cloth feels extravagant. You dream not of beds, but of clean dirt, of mossy stones shaped just right to cradle an arch. You become a creature of the road, your soul stitched not into sandals, but into the rhythm of footfall and silence. Footfall and prayer, footfall and the occasional yelp when stepping on a beetle, and all the while, the book presses against you like a heartbeat, reminding you why you walk, why you suffer, why your feet bleed, because the word must go on, and you are its courier, not swift, but faithful, not grand, but stubborn, not loud, but relentless. You remember the day they first handed you the goose feather quill, not ceremoniously, not with a blessing or a ritual, but with the casual gruffness of someone passing a shovel to a boy expected to dig. Because in truth, that's exactly what writing is in your world. Not art, not vanity, not even always comprehension, but a kind of holy labor, where each letter must be carved into vellum as if you were digging a well in hardened clay. And every mistake is like letting the water leak out before you even reach it. The quill itself is unimpressive at first glance, just a feather plucked from an unfortunate goose, dried in the sun until stiff, and then trimmed carefully by the elder monk who sharpens the tip with the same care he uses for trimming his own beard, meticulously, silently, as if speaking too loud might dull the edge. He shows you how to hold it, not like a stick, not like a knife, but like a flute, resting gently between your fingers, never clenched, because the quill obeys gentleness better than strength. You try, you fail, you drop it, you pick it up again. The elder monk says nothing. That's how you know you're doing it wrong. Eventually, you manage a few scratchy lines on a piece of practice hide, the ink smearing where your fingers tremble, the curves of the letters more like crooked worms than sacred script. But you keep going, because there is no alternative, no escape hatch for trembling fingers in the monastery. Just the quiet expectation that you'll get better before the vellum runs out or your eyesight fails, whichever comes first. The ink is a world of its own, boiled from gall nuts and rusted nails, mixed with wine or vinegar, strained through cloth, thick as tar some days, runny as milk on others. You are told to stir it with a clean stick and never breathe too close unless you want your nose stained blue-black for a week, which of course you do by accident almost immediately, earning a rare chuckle from the scribe seated 2 mats over, a man who has not laughed aloud since before you joined the monastery. You take it as encouragement. Ink smells like metal and mildew and the past. It clings to your skin and your soul. Your fingertips are perpetually smudged, no matter how hard you scrub them with sand. Your robes develop small blotches, ghostly shadows, where a droplet splattered or a blot escaped your control. Soon the others begin to joke that you are more ink than flesh, and you pretend not to like the nickname, but you do. Every morning, you kneel before your work table. A sliver of light falls from the high, narrow window, just enough to illuminate the page, but not your hands. You dip the quill, shake off excess, hold your breath, and then, slowly, form a letter. Each stroke is a prayer, each curve a confession, each completed word a miracle stitched in silence. You learn the rules of majuscule and minuscule, how to widen the base of an M to make it noble, how to lift the tail of a G as if it were sighing upward to heaven. You memorize the correct spacing between lines, the sacred geometry of margins. One evening, you are caught aligning the text too closely to the edge. The elder monk smacks the table once, not to punish, just to wake you up. Margins, he says without looking up, are where the angels rest. Decorations come later. You're not yet trusted with gold leaf or colored inks. Those are for the senior scribes, the ones whose hands no longer shake even after fasting. whose vision remains crisp despite the constant squinting, whose sense of beauty has been honed not by books, but by years of copying them. You watch as they draw delicate vines between columns of text, fill the spaces around saints' names with tiny beasts, some real, some not. One monk paints a rabbit holding a trumpet beside the word repent. You are never sure if it's a joke or a revelation. The quill becomes an extension of you. You carry it in a small leather roll at your waist, along with a bone knife for trimming and a scrap of cloth to wipe excess ink. When you sleep, you place it beside your mat. When you eat, it rests atop your bread like a strange garnish. When you bathe, rare as that is, you wash it separately, reverently, as if it might object to being dipped in the same water as your feet. There is comfort in the repetition, the same phrases, the same pages, the same slow rhythm of creation, but also danger. A misplaced dot, a misaligned letter, a smear where your sleeve brushed the wet ink, and suddenly the entire page is ruined. One afternoon, you spill half a pot of ink across a nearly finished folio. The ink spreads like a spider across the page, blooming into a dark stain that devours the Psalms line by line. You want to cry. Instead, you sit quietly and stare at the ruin for nearly an hour. Then you start again. Some days, you question the purpose. Who will read these pages? Will they even survive the next fire, the next flood, the next war? But then, you think of the book you yourself first read. How the letters danced before your eyes. How the saints seemed to whisper through the pages. How a dead monk's hand reached across time to teach you the meaning of mercy. You write because you were written to, and someday, perhaps, someone else will read your lines and feel the echo of your breath in their own. There are no signatures in these books, no names, just letters. Letters that endure. Letters that refuse to fade even when memory does. Letters that outlive war, famine, even their own authors. And so, you write, quietly, patiently, hour after hour, until the light shifts and the candle gutters, until your back screams and your fingers cramp, until the letters blur and blend and you can no longer tell where your hand ends and the word begins. You are a monk. You are a scribe. You are a quill. You wake before the sun, not because of some sacred calling or divine urgency, but because that is the rhythm life has hammered into your bones. Cold stones beneath your mat, the rustling of robes in the darkness, and the low chants of the older monks echoing through the stone corridors as they shuffle toward the chapel, like ghosts with places to be. The monastery doesn't feel like a holy fortress in those early hours. It feels like a machine, slow to warm, groaning into life, one creaking hinge and flickering candle at a time. And you, just one cog in its great grinding purpose. You eat in silence, of course, always silence, though your stomach growls loudly enough to be a minor form of liturgical rebellion. The meal is a wooden bowl of broth that tastes mostly of warm water with a suggestion of turnip, and a small hunk of yesterday's bread, softened by the steam if you're lucky. You chew slowly, eyes fixed downward, pretending not to hear the novice beside you, breathe through his mouth, like a cart horse. No one speaks. Not because they don't have thoughts, but because words are rationed more strictly than wine. And besides, your mind is already elsewhere, drifting toward the scriptorium. The scriptorium is not grand. No glowing stained glass, no sculpted saints looking down in judgment. It is in truth a converted barn, walls of stone thick with lichen, windows like squinting eyes, and the unmistakable smell of old vellum, wax, sweat, and ink that seems to nest deep in your nose and never leave. The light comes in as slanted beams from narrow slots, illuminating the dust motes like dancing souls. The room is lined with workbenches, each with its own set of tools: wax tablets, ink pots, sandboxes, sharpened knives, and piles of half-finished pages, carefully weighted with stones or little sacks filled with beans. Your bench is near the rear wall, under a drafty crack that lets in the wind, and once, memorably, a confused owl. You sit on a stool made by someone who clearly hated knees, and you begin your day's labor. Copying. Copying isn't just writing. It is an act of resurrection. You are not just transcribing words. You are breathing life back into ancient thoughts, lifting syllables from the dead tongues of the desert and planting them into the living silence of the Irish hills. You copy slowly, reverently, eyes darting from the exemplar before you to your own page, every letter checked, every flourish measured, every line straightened by eye and memory. You don't speak, but you mutter the words under your breath sometimes, letting their shapes roll through your mouth as you carve them into the page. The room is never entirely still. Someone coughs. Someone sneezes. The abbot walks behind you, his sandals making a gentle slap against the stone floor, a sound that causes your spine to stiffen instinctively, even when you know you haven't made a mistake. You hear the occasional crack of a knuckle, the groan of the stool, the scratch of knife against quill, as someone reshapes the tip for a cleaner stroke. Once, the monastery kept sheep solely for the purpose of producing vellum. You remember watching them be skinned, their hides soaked, scraped, stretched, and trimmed until they became blank pages, clean canvases that would soon be reborn as gospels, letters, poems, or saints' lives. You think about those sheep as you write. It keeps you humble. Some days you illuminate. Not often. They don't trust your hand for the gold yet. But now and then, you're allowed to add simple decorations, curling vines, tiny birds, the occasional wide-eyed fish peeking between the columns of text. You enjoy these moments because they let you play just a little in a world otherwise ruled by strict lines and stricter rules. There is a hierarchy among the scribes, as in all things. The older monks get the best pages, the most ornate assignments, the tasks that will be bound in leather and passed from abbey to abbey like sacred relics. You, for now, copy psalms onto training sheets, your work not yet trusted with theology, let alone history. Still, you pour your heart into every letter. You imagine someone reading your psalm 100 years from now, eyes tired, hands cold, lips moving as they whisper the same words you whispered as you wrote them. You hope they notice the care you took with the lettering. You hope they forgive the smudge on page 3. Once, a visitor arrived from a far-off abbey. Tall, sunburnt, speaking in clipped Latin with a strange accent. He asked to see your monastery's library, and you were chosen to guide him. You led him through the stone vault, showing him shelf after shelf of bound volumes, each one hand-copied, hand-sewn, hand-loved. His eyes grew wide. "You're not just a monastery," he said quietly. "You're a book machine." You hadn't thought of it that way before, but yes, you suppose you are. The library is your pride, even though you've read only a fraction of its contents. The books are stacked on slanted lecterns, bound in calf leather, tagged with wax seals. Some are chained to the shelves, not to keep them in, but to keep them from walking off with less reverent hands. You dust them, air them, whisper to them. Books are like monks, silent most of the time, full of secrets, fragile at the seams. Sometimes when the wind howls outside and no visitors are expected, you sit quietly in the corner of the scriptorium and read. Not for instruction, but for the pure, strange pleasure of it. You read about saints who wrestled demons, kings who heard voices, rivers that turned to blood. You read poems in Latin so old you barely understand the grammar, but the rhythm hums through your ribs like a lullaby. You read, and for a moment you are not cold, not hungry, not ink-stained, not bent over a bench. You are somewhere else entirely, inside the page. But then the bell rings, and you return. You rise, stretch your back, dust the crumbs from your robe, and return to the page, because the monastery doesn't sleep, and neither does the work. It continues letter by letter, line by line, and so do you. There's a certain weight that settles on your shoulders the day you're told to carry a book. Not just any book, of course. Not one of the slim psalters, meant for practice, or a battered manual filled with correction marks, but a full, bound manuscript, thick with illumination, heavy with meaning, and, more importantly, absurdly, impractically heavy with actual mass. You are not yet a man by the world's standards, but you are no longer considered a child among the brethren. And that means the time has come for you to learn how to transport knowledge. Not in your mind, but on your back. The book they hand you is wrapped in wool, bound tight with cord, and smells like wax, wet sheep, and the faint musk of the older monk who copied most of it over 3 long winters in a corner cell near the apiary. You run your fingers over the raised leather tooling, tracing the cross stamped into the surface, and you wonder how many prayers were whispered into its pages. How many hours were spent bent in silence while the outside world forgot this place even existed. You are told not to open it, not even to peek, and of course, that only makes your fingers itch. Still, you obey. You learn quickly that to carry a book properly is to bind it to your own body, as if it were a slow-moving limb. There's a leather strap you loop over your shoulder, designed for better balance, but the wool wrapping shifts as you walk, and the corner of the binding digs into your ribs with every step. At first, you think this is a test of strength. Later, you realize it's a test of reverence. You begin to train. It sounds strange to call it training, as if you are preparing for war or a sport. But in truth, the practice of carrying books across vast and indifferent landscapes requires a kind of bodily discipline that borders on spiritual masochism. You walk loops around the monastery grounds, across gravel paths, over fields of nettles and gorse, barefoot as always, with the book pressing into your spine. You learn how to shift your weight, how to cinch the belt tighter on windy days, how to squat when you rest so the book doesn't roll forward and snap your balance like a twig. You learn how to protect the book when it rains, when you fall, when startled geese rise in a thunder of wings and knock you flat, because books cannot fall. You can fall. You may break your nose, bruise your elbow, get trampled by a startled cow, but the book must not so much as scrape its corners. A bent vellum page is a minor sin. A torn one is a tragedy. You watch the older monks go out on short pilgrimages to nearby abbeys, each one a slow parade of hunched shoulders and quietly muttered prayers. They leave with books in sacks, in baskets, even hidden under cloaks, as if they were smugglers of something far more dangerous than ink. They return weeks later, sunburnt and limping, but with new texts strapped to their backs. Texts copied, exchanged, or rescued from monasteries on the brink of fire, flood, or famine. You begin to understand the trade. This is not mere charity, not only holy work. It is preservation. The world is constantly trying to erase itself, and monks like you are the pencil marks being retraced again and again to keep the memory from vanishing. You also begin to see that books are not just things you carry, they carry you. There is pride in the way the brethren speak of them, reverence that borders on obsession. Some books are known by name: the Great Psalter, the Red Gospels, the Book of the Three Hands, a nickname earned because 3 different scribes gave up on it halfway through. These are not just pages bound together. They are personalities, legends. Your body adjusts to the burden in time. Your shoulders develop strange ridges. Your back thickens in ways you hadn't expected. And your gait becomes deliberate, rhythmic. You begin to feel the balance of the book, the way a sailor feels the wind in his sails. You know when it shifts, when the straps need tightening, when the load must be redistributed or paused for prayer and breath. You are told of monks who crossed the Alps, with books hidden beneath their robes, who died in snowdrifts, but whose texts were found intact beside them. Of brothers who wrapped gospels in waxed linen and floated them across rivers when bridges were broken. Of one silent monk who allegedly memorized the entire Book of Kings during a long illness, and who dictated it from memory after the manuscript was stolen by mercenaries who thought it might be gold. You think these are stories to inspire you, but the way the older monks tell them, quietly over lentils with faraway looks, you begin to wonder if they're all true. Eventually, the abbot selects you for your first short delivery. It is to a neighboring monastery only a few miles away. But the path runs through marshes, and there are rumors of bandits, or at least bored shepherds, with nothing better to do than throw rocks. You are nervous, of course, but also flattered. You tie your bundle with care, say a dozen Hail Marys, and set out barefoot into the grey morning mist. The road is not kind. You step in a puddle that turns out to be much deeper than expected. Soak your hem, and must spend 20 minutes drying your outer wrappings in the wind. A dog barks at you from a field, then follows you for a mile, presumably just to critique your posture. At one point, a woman on the road mistakes you for a beggar and offers you a piece of onion wrapped in cloth. You accept it gratefully. When you finally arrive, knees aching and fingers numb, the brother at the gate greets you, not with thanks, but with a mild squint. "Is it dry?" he asks. You nod. He inspects the wrapping like a baker, judging a loaf. "No smudges?" Another nod. "Good. You can come in." And just like that, you are no longer merely a scribe in training. You are a carrier, a bearer of words, a traveler of the book road. You eat warm bread that night, and a monk from Spain sings a hymn in a voice like rain on stone, and you sleep beside a fireplace with your book tucked under your arm, because despite the jokes, you still don't quite trust anyone else with it. And when you wake the next morning and begin your walk back, empty-handed, your back feels strangely light, but your soul perhaps a little heavier. Because now you understand, books are not only meant to be read. They are meant to be moved. Your feet are sore, your calves are tight, and your back still carries the ghost of the book that pressed into your spine the entire way there. But despite the weariness clinging to your limbs, there's a quiet pulse of pride thrumming in your chest, because the elders have noticed you. Yes, truly noticed you. For the first time, not as the skinny boy who spilled ink on a psalter once, or who forgot to scrub the candle soot from the choir loft, but as someone ready, or at least willing, to join the long and winding tradition of monastic wanderers, those unlikely pilgrims whose holy duty is not just to meditate and illuminate, but to walk far, barefoot, in silence and in rain, carrying with them the heavy, fragile weight of memory itself. So when the abbot calls you aside one dusky evening, just after Compline, his voice low and casual, you already know what's coming, even before he finishes tying the waxed linen around the book. "You'll be going east," he says, as if east is simply another room, not a weeks-long trek through bogs and bramble, across rivers swollen with spring melt, through villages where your tongue is foreign and your robe is a magnet for mockery. You'll go with Brother Aidan and Brother Colum. 3 is safest. You nod, heart galloping like a startled hare, and say nothing because you're not sure whether to feel honored or terrified. And both seem inappropriate emotions for a monk. At dawn, you step away from the monastery gate with nothing but your robe, a small bag of smoked fish and barley bread, a water skin, and a manuscript carefully swaddled and strapped across Brother Colum's back. For now. Your turn to carry it will come soon enough. You begin with silent prayer, as is custom, but quickly your thoughts turn to more practical matters. Blisters, the taste of salt on your lips, the biting wind that seems to funnel itself directly into your nostrils. The road east is more an idea than a path. There are no cobblestones, no signs, not even ruts deep enough to promise that others have passed recently. There are only vague directions passed from one monk to another, like secret psalms. Follow the line of willows. Keep the sun on your left until it disappears. When you see the rock shaped like a goose, turn north. It feels less like traveling and more like deciphering a living riddle written by the land itself. The first few days are uneventful, in that uneventful way that leaves your body aching but your mind strangely cleansed. You step over roots, wade through icy streams, and sleep beneath low trees that drop dew on your face just before dawn. Brother Aidan snores. Brother Colum mumbles Latin in his sleep. You wonder if you do too, and you half hope you do, because it seems appropriately pious. Villages appear here and there, like smudges on a parchment. Sometimes you are met with blank stares. Other times with soft loaves and awkward blessings from women whose own sons went off to become monks and never returned. One old man hands you a boiled egg and asks if St. Patrick really chased all the snakes from Ireland. You tell him yes, but only the visible ones. Then there are the less generous encounters. A gang of boys throws pebbles and calls you sky watchers and mud feet. A drunken blacksmith tries to sell you a donkey and won't take vow of poverty for an answer. A sow follows you for 3 miles, suspicious of the smoked fish in your bag. But through it all, the manuscript remains dry, untouched, even by the curious hands of the curious children who follow you out of town singing a deliberately off-key version of Pangelingua. You've grown used to this now, that being a monk means being seen as part holy man, part beggar, part lunatic, and old ghost. You pass through the world, not like a soldier or a merchant, but more like a shadow of an idea people vaguely remember from childhood sermons. You are peace in a time that doesn't always have space for peace. At night, you and your brothers take turns watching the fire, though it's mostly symbolic. The manuscript is tucked carefully into a cloth bundle, surrounded by damp wool to prevent the cold from curling its edges. The night creatures sing, distant wolves howl, and occasionally the branches crack in a way that makes you instinctively reach for nothing, because monks don't carry weapons. Your defense is your robe, your silence, and, you suppose, the sheer improbability of someone mugging a barefoot man carrying a hymnal. Somewhere, after the 8th day, it begins to rain in earnest. Not a light drizzle, not a poetic mist, but a true, enthusiastic Irish downpour that seems determined to melt the very landscape back into the sea. Your robe clings to your legs, your toes squelch in unseen puddles, and your brothers resemble angry, dripping sacks of laundry. But no one complains. There's nothing to complain about. This is just the cost of being a monk on the move. That night, the 3 of you find shelter in a derelict barn filled with sheep that seem more curious than frightened. You lie down on a pile of old straw, the manuscript propped between your knees like a sleeping child, and wonder what the book actually contains. You're not allowed to read it, not without permission, but the temptation rises like yeast. Is it a psalter? A gospel? The Confessions of St. Augustine, copied by a blind brother who traced each letter with his thumb? Or is it something stranger, an herbal compendium, a collection of local saints' lives, a book of chants sung only on winter solstice, when the wind howls through cloisters like lost angels? You drift into sleep before you can guess further. Your dreams muddled with muddy roads and feathered quills, and a goose that won't stop lecturing you in Latin. In the morning, the rain has stopped. but the road is now a ribbon of mud that threatens to swallow your ankles whole. Still, you press on. There is no alternative. A manuscript in motion cannot rest long. Books, like ideas, are meant to move, and if you falter now, the knowledge it carries might disappear forever. You pass through a forest so still it makes you whisper without meaning to. Trees arch above like cathedral ceilings, and when Brother Column slips on a wet root, the only thing he worries about, before his own elbow, before his dignity, is whether the manuscript got wet. It didn't. You all breathe again. Eventually you arrive at a way station. A small monastery built into a hillside. Its stone walls covered in creeping ivy. Its bell made of iron so old it rings with a dull, tired groan. The monks there are pale, quiet, and incredibly grateful. They bring you lentil stew and bless your feet. And they treat the manuscript like an honored guest, placing it on a cloth-covered table and bowing slightly as if it were a relic rather than vellum and ink. You sleep that night in real beds beneath a roof that doesn't leak, with your belly full and your body humming with exhaustion. You have walked for 11 days, barefoot, carrying a book. You have earned your rest. Tomorrow, you will begin again, because books are never carried just once. You wake before the bell, your limbs aching in that oddly satisfying way that follows a night of stillness after days of motion. And for a moment, just a moment, you forget where you are, because the room is too dry, too warm, and the faint smell of roasted barley in the air makes it feel more like a memory than a monastery. The wool blanket tangled around your knees seems like a luxury pulled from some distant noble's chamber, and you blink, confused, until Brother Aidan coughs somewhere in the dark, and the spell breaks, reminding you that, yes, you're still a monk. Yes, this is still Europe, and no, you didn't die and rise into a monastery-shaped heaven. By the time the sun yawns up over the hills, you're already walking again. Your feet hesitant at first, as they remember the rhythm of trudging. Your shoulders adapting once more to the shifting weight of the manuscript that has now become an extension of your body. Neither burden nor blessing, but something in between, like a quiet responsibility that hovers just above the skin, whispering at every step. Don't trip, don't fall, don't fail. The days grow colder as you head farther east. Forests give way to mist-draped lowlands where the trees look like bony hands clawing at the sky. And every breath you take feels damp and mossy, as if the land itself is trying to seep into your lungs. You pass through villages where people speak a dialect you can barely follow, where Amen sounds like Omein, and children stare at you with round eyes, unsure whether you are monks or just unusually clean vagabonds. One man offers you a turnip, unwashed, unpeeled, and you accept it like a jewel, bowing low and smiling as Brother Column bites into it with exaggerated gratitude. It is during one of these stops that you first meet wolves. Not metaphorical ones, not the imagined beasts of parables, but real, shaggy, yellow-eyed creatures who appear on the edge of the forest, just as you're settling down for your evening stew of boiled barley and cabbage. They don't growl, they don't charge, they just watch. 4 of them, silent as ghosts, their breath misting in the dusk air, their ears twitching to catch the cracking of twigs beneath your sandals, or rather, beneath your bare, calloused feet. Because, of course, you never wear sandals. Not now. Not after all this time. Your feet wouldn't know what to do with leather anymore. Brother Aidan whispers a prayer. Brother Colum offers one of the wolves a fish head, which is ignored because apparently even wolves have standards. Eventually, the creatures fade into the trees, more curious than hungry, and you all breathe easier. Later, you learn from a passing woodsman that those wolves are known to stalk pilgrims, not out of malice, but out of sheer boredom. They like the singing, he says, pointing at your robe with a grin. Monks taste like dried apples, but they hum nice hymns. Despite the humor, the reality settles heavy in your chest. This world is not always safe, not even for those who carry gospels. There are no bodyguards for monks, no shields but your own humility, no weapons but words and the subtle armor of discipline. And even that has limits. The weather turns cruel just as you reach the first true mountain pass. Snow, of course. Because what is a holy pilgrimage without the indignity of snow sneaking into your robes and freezing your toes mid-prayer? You trudge through knee-high drifts, your breath emerging in plumes, the manuscript double-wrapped in sheepskin and strapped under your arm like a baby too precious to cry. The wind screams like a vengeful angel, and your hands lose all feeling. But you keep going, because that is what you do. That is what monks do. You walk. Somewhere near the ridge, you pass the frozen skeleton of a shrine. A wooden cross, half buried in ice, its corners chewed by time and neglect. A faded Latin inscription clings to the wood, half erased by storms. Ora pro nobis. Pray for us. You whisper the words aloud, barely audible over the howl of the wind, and you wonder who put it there. Another monk? A lost farmer? Someone who also believed that the way forward was always a form of prayer. You descend the mountain into a valley that smells faintly of smoke and horse dung, which is frankly a relief after 3 days of frozen air and snow-stung nostrils. The first sign of civilization is not a bell tower, but a pile of fish bones arranged like a crude offering beside a tree. Then comes a cluster of houses, wooden, thatched, leaning at odd angles as if drunk on their own age. You are received by an elderly nun with a face like folded parchment, who welcomes you with open arms and a bowl of soup so thick it nearly stands on its own. She asks no questions. She sees your robes. She sees the bundle. She nods. That is enough. In this new monastery, a humble outpost with no tower, no relics, no choir, your presence is still cause for celebration. Not loud celebration, mind you. Monks don't throw parties, but there is a quiet reverence in the way the brothers here touch the manuscript, their fingertips lingering on the vellum's edge, their eyes wide as children offered candy. We heard of this copy, one whispers. We didn't know it survived. And you realize that what you carry isn't just ink and skin. It's hope. It's proof that words outlive borders, that beauty persists even in frost and filth, and that somewhere, across miles of mud and fear, someone is always still writing. That night, you're invited to sing. You don't have a good voice. You know this. But you sing anyway, because sometimes that's all you can offer. Your voice cracks on the high notes. Brother Aidan harmonizes, sort of. Brother Colum forgets half the words and hums the rest. Still, When the last note fades, there is silence, and then a smile from the elder who hasn't smiled all week. Afterward, you sit near the fire with the other monks, sipping warm goat milk and swapping stories of near misses and strange dreams and visions that might have been real or just the result of too much fasting. One of them tells you of a monastery that keeps its books in glass jars buried beneath apple trees because the monks there believe that knowledge should grow slowly, like fruit. Another claims to have met a monk who wrote a gospel entirely in green ink because he said heaven was green and he wanted God to feel at home when reading it. You don't know what's true anymore. Maybe none of it. Maybe all of it. But you write these tales down later when the others are asleep, carving them into your memory as surely as you would onto vellum. Because even if they aren't part of the sacred canon, they are still holy in their own way. Fragments of a world held together by ink and stubbornness. You sleep near the manuscript that night, not because anyone tells you to, but because it feels right. Because after so many miles, it no longer belongs only to the monastery. It belongs to you too. Not in ownership, but in intimacy. It knows the shape of your gait, the rhythm of your breath, the sound your knee makes when it pops going upstairs. You dream not of wolves or frost or ridicule, but of ink flowing endlessly, curling across the page like wind through reeds. Tomorrow, you will walk again. There are still more valleys to cross, more dialects to misunderstand, more hospitality to stumble into. But tonight, you rest, not as a burdened traveler, but as a keeper of stories. One more link in a chain of barefoot scribes, winding across the face of Europe like ink along the margin of time. The days blur again, though not from tedium, but from the kind of repetition that lulls rather than tires. The kind that, after a while, begins to feel like prayer. You rise, you walk, you speak little, you listen much, and somewhere in between, dodging puddles and picking gravel out of the soles of your feet, you begin to sense the rhythm of the land itself, as though Europe is not just a place to traverse, but a psalm being slowly whispered by the fields, the trees, the wind grazing the tops of distant cathedrals. By now, your journey has brought you deep into Frankish territory, a landscape gentler than the crags and frost of weeks past, though no less humbling. It rolls out in sleepy green curves, dotted with the occasional abbey or village. The steeples, often the first hint of civilization after long hours of silence. It is in one such hamlet, a place so small it barely warrants a name on any parchment map, that you encounter something peculiar. A monk no longer walking, but growing roots, or so he claims. And by that, he means he has not moved from his post in 12 years, tending a solitary garden behind a stone chapel, reciting psalms from memory, while coaxing vegetables from a patch of soil, so stubborn and rocky that even the weeds hesitate. His name is Brother T-Bol, and though his robe is patched and sun-bleached, and his fingernails lined with centuries of dirt, he welcomes you as if he's been expecting you for a very long time. You stay for only one night, but his presence stays with you much longer. He shows you his tomatoes, small and bruised, but lovingly named after saints, and explains that growing a single healthy carrot in this climate is harder than copying the Book of Kells blindfolded. which you both laugh at, though you can't help but picture some poor novice actually trying it. As the stars settle over the chapel that evening, Brother Thibaut tells you a thing that sounds like a joke, but sits in your mind like prophecy. If you want to make a man forget hunger, hand him a spade. If you want to make him remember joy, hand him a book. And then, as the coals dim, he asks, just once and only softly, whether he might touch the manuscript. You do not hesitate. His hands tremble as he lifts the edge of the sheepskin, unfolding it like one might unveil a relic or a sleeping infant. He does not speak while he reads. He simply breathes, slowly, as though the Latin itself were feeding him, syllable by syllable. You watch him gently return the manuscript to its wrap, and then bow over it, and you realize with quiet awe that this exchange, this tiny and sacred transaction of reverence, has happened dozens of times already on your journey, and will happen dozens more. The book moves through hands, not like treasure, but like memory. Weighty, living, irreplaceable. The next morning, he's already in the garden when you depart. He waves, not grandly, but with the subtle motion of someone parting from a friend rather than a guest. And you promise, though you know it's unlikely, to return one day, perhaps with another book, or just your own stories. You walk on, the landscape turns chalky for a while. White rocks and dusty air that catch the light in ways that make it hard to tell what's road and what's mirage. Your feet are harder now, though, calloused in the shape of Europe. You scarcely notice the cuts anymore. Even your posture has changed. Less upright, perhaps, but steadier. With the slow, deliberate sway of someone who has come to know that haste is the enemy of endurance. The manuscript feels lighter these days, not because it weighs less, but because your body has begun to understand it, to accommodate its presence like an old injury that no longer throbs, just reminds. In one larger town, you forget its name before you even leave it. You find yourself in a scriptorium with walls covered in prayers, written in every language imaginable. Greek, Latin, Old High German, even something that looks suspiciously like ogham scratched into the wood of the doorframe. The monks there are friendly, if a little bewildered by your Gaelic, and they feed you roasted beans and dark rye bread, so dense it might survive a siege. It is here you witness something rare, a book being born, not copied, not translated, but conceived. A young monk, probably no older than you were when you first joined the order, is hunched over a rough sheaf of parchment, drafting the opening lines of a local history, in his own hand, with no template, no older text to follow, just his own recollection shaped into letters. He's not confident. His quill stutters on the page, and every few lines he sighs deeply, dips again, mutters a prayer under his breath. But he does not stop, and you realize, watching him, just how fragile and yet powerful knowledge is. That even the most ornate gospel, the most glorious illumination, began like this, with hesitation, with ink, with hope. You ask him later what he's writing. He answers, "My village had a flood. No one wrote it down. I thought maybe someone should." You nod and you mean it when you say, yes, someone should. Before you leave the monastery, you leave a single psalm copied in your own hand. A thank you, yes, but also a breadcrumb. A quiet proof that you passed through here, that you existed here, if only for a day, and that you too remembered something worth writing. The road beyond the town is wide and rutted with the grooves of ox carts. There are more people now, pilgrims, tradesmen, travelers, and you are no longer quite the oddity you once were, though your bare feet still earn glances. You pass a group of jongleurs performing beside a shrine, one of them juggling pine cones, while another sings a song in a language that makes no sense, but feels oddly familiar. A merchant offers you a boiled egg in exchange for a prayer. A beggar tries to sell you a rock shaped like the Virgin Mary's foot. It's noisy, but it's beautiful too. The world, it seems, is not all hardship and frost and hungry wolves. There is warmth tucked into its corners. There is laughter and stories and meals shared on doorsteps with people who've never read a word you've copied, but still know how to welcome the weary. You begin to feel that your journey is less about carrying a book and more about collecting moments like petals pressed between vellum. One night, as you prepare to sleep beside a stream, humming with frogs, Brother Column murmurs, "Do you think anyone will remember us?" You consider this, and then you say, "I think the book will," because it will. It carries not just scripture, not just sayings, but you. Your sweat, your notes in the margins, your miscopied words corrected by moonlight, your journey pressed into its bindings like pressed flowers. And maybe, one day, a monk in some far-off land will open its pages and find not just gospel, but the echo of your voice in the way the letters lean, just slightly, to the left. The morning mist clings to your robe like a damp second skin as you enter the valley, where word of your arrival seems to have traveled faster than your own tired feet. You're told by a child no less, who seems entirely too enthusiastic for someone who's never had to walk barefoot across 3 kingdoms, that the abbey ahead has real cheese, not the soft, crumbly kind you've grown used to, but hard wheels of it, yellowed and waxed, sharp and nutty, and more importantly, unshared with the pigs. And though your heart should leap at the thought of such decadence, you remain calmly, mildly curious. The hunger will come later. For now, you're more interested in the prospect of dry floors. The Frankish abbey is a squat stone thing nestled into a bend in the river, flanked by dense woods and a vegetable garden that looks as if it's been tended by angels, or more plausibly, very bored monks. A bell chimes distantly as you approach, not urgently, but like a yawn stretched across stone and sky. A young monk greets you at the gate. He's wearing actual sandals, which you pointedly ignore. His accent's round and rolling, like the hills, and his Latin is overly careful, clearly practiced in echo chambers. Still, he welcomes you with a smile, gestures to a bench by the cloister, and offers what you suspect may be the cleanest cup you've seen in weeks. The water inside tastes faintly of mint. You suspect this is intentional, and suddenly, this place feels a little too luxurious. Inside the scriptorium, however, you find the usual familiar chaos. Half-finished psalters, scrap parchment covered in ink trials, one monk asleep on his own elbow with a goose feather, still clutched between his fingers. The abbot, a stooped man who smells faintly of lamp oil and beets, shows you their finest volume. You nod respectfully, though inwardly you're appalled. The text alignment is enthusiastic, the margins meander, and the illuminations appear to have been painted by someone unfamiliar with both anatomy and lions. You compliment it anyway. It's the polite thing to do. Later, you're invited to join in a meal, cheese included, and you try not to eat too quickly, lest you appear too feral. You fail, but your hosts are kind and make no remark. They are more interested, it seems, in your manuscript. They ask where it came from, who wrote it, how many monks have carried it. You offer answers, but vague ones, because truly, even you have begun to lose track. The book is passed through hands, over mountains, across rivers, and it carries the fingerprints of dozens who will never be named. It has outlived its original author, and perhaps even its intended purpose. But still it moves forward, like you do. At night, you are given a corner in the dormitory. A straw mattress, so soft it might as well be clouds, and the rare pleasure of sleeping indoors. You are grateful beyond measure, though the silence inside these walls is different from your Irish home. Less wind, more stone, and the distant creak of beams settling into their old age. You whisper a prayer, not to the saints, but to your feet, thanking them for surviving another day. In the morning, as you prepare to leave, the abbot pulls you aside. He asks, not demands, just asks, if you would consider leaving the manuscript with them. Just for a time. Just to study, to copy, to learn from it. You hesitate, the strap tight in your hand, because the thought of letting it go, even briefly, even to trustworthy hands, makes your chest tighten. But you remember Brother Thibault's words. You remember the young scribe documenting a flood so his village wouldn't be forgotten. And so, with a reluctant reverence, you loosen your grip. You place the manuscript on their stone lectern, as gently as one might lower a body into water, and you watch as the monks gather around it. Not to touch, not yet, but simply to look, as if the book might speak aloud if stared at long enough. You tell them you'll return for it. You don't set a date. They nod, understanding that these things follow not calendars, but callings. You stay for several days, helping where you can, sharing techniques, even teaching one particularly ambitious novice how to grind lapis lazuli into pigment without turning it into blue sludge. You even, somewhat blasphemously, draw a small squirrel in the corner of a margin when no one is looking. The novice spots it, of course, and giggles. You pretend not to notice. Eventually, though, it is time to go. Your next destination lies further south, through forest and fog. And while your pack is lighter, without the manuscript, your heart feels unexpectedly heavier. You are untethered now, walking without your holy burden, and it takes a full day before your stride adjusts. Still, there is something liberating about the shift. You feel, perhaps for the first time, that you are not just a carrier of the sacred, but a part of the sacred itself. A scribe made flesh, a walking manuscript, whose every bruise and blister is another footnote on the road. As you pass into new regions, the language shifts again. Fewer understand your Latin, fewer still your Gaelic. You begin relying more on gestures, on smiles, on the universal currency of humility. In one village, a woman hands you a handful of cherries without a word. In another, a child gives you a carved wooden bird and runs off before you can offer thanks. You begin to suspect that generosity is not a miracle, but a habit. One that flourishes even where books do not. You sleep now wherever shelter is offered. Barns, porches, the occasional ruined chapel, whose roof has long since retired. You watch stars through broken tiles. You hear mice scratching through the straw. You grow comfortable with discomfort. You develop a peculiar fondness for the smell of damp wool and your own fading sandalwood ink. And every few days, in quiet moments, you remember the manuscript. You picture it resting on the Frankish lectern, its pages open to your familiar scroll, your tiny squirrel still nestled in the corner, bringing one young novice a quiet joy. You miss it, yes, but more than that, you trust it, because it has become more than parchment and ink. It is now a story in motion, a part of a larger script whose ending you may never see, but whose middle you have helped shape. You continue onward, no longer just to deliver books, but to live them. To write, if not on vellum, then on paths and people and memory. And somewhere, in the cool hush of a distant scriptorium, another young monk lowers his candle, leans over a page you once touched, and begins to write. You're awakened before dawn by a particularly assertive rooster that clearly doesn't understand the value of dreams. The sky is still a deep navy when you stretch your weary limbs and pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, the fabric damp with dew and a few lingering crumbs of last night's barley biscuit. Another day, another road, another blister, singing its song in perfect harmony with your aching knees. You hum a psalm beneath your breath, partly for comfort, partly to distract yourself from the increasing realization that your feet have developed the topography of a very devout mountain range. But today is not just another day wandering from abbey to abbey, haggling for fish soup and begging for ink. No, today marks your arrival at a small yet growing community that has recently agreed to adopt the rule of Saint Columbanus. And if that phrase doesn't sound heavy to the average passerby, rest assured, it weighs considerably more than the manuscript you used to carry. The rule, written by your revered Irish predecessor Columbanus, is not known for its leniency. In fact, it makes most Benedictines wince. It requires fasting that borders on aggressive, silence so absolute that sneezing might feel like rebellion, and cold river baths that could freeze sins into your bones. Yet despite, or perhaps because of, its severity, it spreads like ivy, curling itself around abbeys, hungry for purpose, for structure, for a discipline that strips away the chaos of flesh and sharpens the soul into something singular, something luminous. You arrive at the gates of this community just as the monks are lining up for morning prayers, eyes puffy with sleep, robes unevenly tied. They look at you, barefoot, travel-stained, radiating the subtle smell of pine, smoke, and sheep. And they know who you are before you even speak. You are not the first Irish emissary to arrive. You are, however, the first in a long while. They make room for you in the line without question. You do not speak. You simply bow your head and enter the rhythm. Later, in a warm room that smells faintly of beeswax and old bread, the abbot asks you to guide them through the rule. Not to recite it, but to embody it. To demonstrate how one fasts not with martyrdom, but quiet grace. To show that silence is not absence, but presence, deepened. To lead them to the river and teach them how to bathe in a way that cleanses the soul more than the skin. You find yourself becoming a teacher. Not by design, certainly not by training, but by default. You, the wandering barefoot scribe who once stumbled over Latin vowels and mistook beet juice for ink, are now someone these men look to. You quote the rule from memory, not out of pride, but necessity, and they write it down as though you are the very parchment on which it was first inscribed. Your lessons are simple. You show them how to chant through the hunger pangs, how to rub nettles on sore joints, not because it helps, but because it hurts slightly less than everything else. How to keep your spine straight even as the cold presses in. And most importantly, how to balance this severity with a softness of spirit. How to smile, even just inwardly, while following rules that seem built to break you. At one point, a young monk breaks the silence to ask if he's allowed to keep a pet mouse, one that's taken up residence near his sleeping mat. You suppress a chuckle and reply with a slow, solemn nod. Only if the mouse follows the rule. You whisper. The other monks spend the rest of the day trying not to laugh. You feel the rule loosen slightly, not in its words, but in the way it wraps around them. Firm, but not suffocating. When evening falls, they invite you to speak, not with words, but with your pen. They unroll a long strip of vellum, unmarked and smooth, and ask you to write the rule in your hand, in your ink, with your voice. You hesitate only a moment before dipping your quill into the pot of ink and beginning. Your hand is steady. The letters flow like a prayer recited 1,000 times before. But as you write, you realize something strange. This act feels less like copying and more like carving a path, as if each letter you form becomes another stone in a long, winding road that stretches backward into Ireland and forward into whatever places you've yet to reach. The monks gather around as you write. Some lean forward to study your strokes. Others close their eyes and simply listen to the scratch of your quill. A sound more sacred, perhaps, than any sermon. You add flourishes only where necessary, favoring clarity over ornament, purpose over pride. You write slowly, not because you are tired, though you most certainly are, but because the words deserve it. This is not just ink on skin. It is something heavier, something that whispers when you sleep and sings when the wind passes over it. When you finish, they bind the parchment with care, sliding it into a wooden cover that smells of pine resin and thyme. You pass your fingers over the finished product and nod. Not because it is perfect, but because it is honest. The next morning, the abbot places the volume into a cloth wrap and sets it beside their altar. Not to worship, but to remember. A living rule shaped by the hands of a barefoot monk who has walked more roads than most horses. You leave quietly, without ceremony. The monks rise early to see you off, but say nothing. They simply bow. You bow in return, and then step into the fog. As you walk away, the cold creeps back in. The path is muddy, the air thick with that faint, persistent wetness that Ireland seems to have mailed ahead of you. But you carry something new now. Not a book, not even the rule itself, but the strange and subtle feeling that you are part of something that stretches wider than any road, deeper than any ink, older than even the language you write in. You think briefly of the mouse. You smile. The road winds forward with the kind of casual indifference that only ancient dirt paths can manage. Neither welcoming nor hostile, simply there, like a weary friend who's seen too much to pretend anymore. You walk it in silence, your soul's hardened and numb to the pebble-studded pain of travel, though every once in a while, one especially cheeky stone will lodge itself precisely where the arch of your foot still remembers comfort. But you've long since accepted this as part of the rhythm, like the squeak of your belt pouch or the gentle slosh of the ink flask tied to your waist. You are no longer surprised when small miracles unfold, like the fact that your ink hasn't frozen, or that your tunic hasn't entirely unraveled, or that the monks you visit, even the most reluctant, always seem to make room for one more scroll on their shelves. You have come to see your life as a strange, parchment-scented symphony, composed of footsteps, prayers, and the occasional sneeze from sleeping on damp straw. Tonight, though, you find yourself tugged into the corner of an abbey kitchen, sipping lukewarm broth and discussing the properties of ink with a monk who, frankly, smells like he's been sleeping with the goats. Which he may have, come to think of it. The goats here are unusually affectionate. He introduces himself as Brother Cyneric, and he insists that the key to red ink lies not in berries or beet juice, but in cinnabar and wine-soaked bark. You raise an eyebrow, but don't argue. You've heard stranger recipes, including one that involved soaking parchment in the urine of a fasting boy under a full moon. That monk had very intense eyes and no eyebrows. Still, Brother Cyneric produces a small vial, uncorks it, and reveals an inky red fluid that smells faintly of cloves and regret. He dips a quill into it and writes the letter A on a scrap of calfskin, then holds it up to the firelight. The color gleams like a bishop's ruby, deep and unapologetic. You nod slowly. It looks like the kind of ink the devil would autograph his letters with. You mutter. Cyneric cackles so hard, he nearly drops the bottle. That's the point, he says. If the devil sees his name written in red, maybe he'll think twice about sticking his nose in our Gospels. This is the kind of logic you've come to love. Strange, circular, faintly magical. You spend the evening exchanging ink recipes, like gossip. There's oak gall for black ink, of course, fermented with iron salts and sometimes soot if you're desperate. Some monks swear by adding vinegar to keep mold at bay. Others insist on wine, which makes the text smell a little like confession after a festival. You once met a scribe in Gaul who insisted that burnt almond oil made the best ink for marginalia. His margins were full of birds in hats, so perhaps he was onto something. There's also the matter of ink stability. You recount the tale of a monk whose pages turned ghostly grey over time because he'd used ash from an improperly blessed fire. Historians still argue, you say between bites of turnip bread, whether it was the ash, The binding agent, art or the fact that he never bathed. Cynric snorts and spills some wine into his sleeve. He doesn't notice. Eventually, you retreat to the scriptorium, which in this abbey doubles as a kind of multi-purpose storage room. Baskets of grain press against a writing desk. A chicken sleeps under the bench. It's cozy in the way only monastic spaces can be. Spartan, but strangely affectionate. As though the room itself has decided to tolerate your presence because you didn't complain about the draft. You spread out a page to copy and test Cynric's ink. The first strokes are smooth, rich, and almost unnerving in their brightness. It's a strange sensation, writing sacred words with something so unholy looking. You pause and ask yourself whether color changes meaning or merely how we perceive it. But that's a question for theologians and painters. You are a monk. Your job is to write and not spill ink on your robe. You usually fail at one of these. By midnight, you've finished half a psalm and added a tiny red bird in the corner. It's not blasphemous. It's decorative. Probably, as the candle burns lower and your eyes begin to blur, you think about all the different inks you've touched in your life. The subtle grays made with soot and rainwater. The stubborn browns brewed from old walnuts. The shimmering golds used sparingly for names too holy to be written plainly. You've tasted half of them by accident. You've spilled all of them, and yet there's something transcendent in each. The way they bind thought to page, memory to skin. In some far-off future, you imagine someone opening this book and tracing their fingers along your letters, perhaps marveling at the strange red hue, perhaps wondering if you wrote them in candlelight or in some sun-dappled courtyard, perhaps wondering if the hand that wrote these words ever trembled, ever laughed, ever cried. And the answer, of course, would be yes. Trembling happens often. So does laughter. So do tears. You pause to stretch your back and accidentally elbow the chicken. It clucks once and resumes snoring. You whisper an apology and decide that's enough writing for the night. Back in the sleeping room, you crawl under a blanket that smells like dried herbs and ancient linen. The fire has died down, but your body is warm from the work, the conversation, the quiet joy of ink that doesn't smudge. As you close your eyes, you dream of red letters dancing across parchment, forming words you've never seen, in a language you almost understand. They swirl and scatter, then gather into the shape of a bird. It nods at you and flies off the edge of the page, into the dark. You smile in your sleep, the morning air is stiff with dew, and your bones creak in quiet protest. As you rise from your straw mat, the faint crinkle of parchment echoing in your joints, like the memory of too many hours hunched over writing desks in rooms that smell perpetually of ink, tallow, and boiled cabbage. Your fingers, still smudged with dried red ink from the night before, twitch instinctively toward the satchel at your side. A satchel that now contains 3 folios you've carefully copied and bound over the past week. Their spines rough but sturdy, stitched tight with waxed thread and your own resolve. Today you are not just a scribe. You're a courier, a tradesman of the holiest sort, a sort of monkish diplomat, navigating a world where peace is often brokered, not by sword or coin, but by parchment and the quiet authority of carefully inked Latin. You step out into the chilly courtyard, where the sun still hides behind a veil of coastal mist, and Brother Cyneric is already awake, feeding a goat what appears to be a torn scrap of marginalia. You nod in silence, and he nods back, offering you a small sack of dried apples and a soft warning. Don't trust monks with clean fingernails. The world beyond the abbey gates awaits you again, not as a cold, uncaring expanse, but as a long corridor of unwritten margins, an endless footnote scrawled across Europe. And this time, your destination is peculiar. A hilltop monastery known more for its wine than its scribes, whose abbot is said to trade in books the way others trade in relics or relic-shaped bread. You've heard whispers about him. Abbot Remigius, they say, has a library of works no Irish eye has ever seen, bound in bizarre leathers and written in languages that even angels find tricky. But he doesn't give freely. He barters, and so, slung over your back, beneath the folds of your tattered cloak, you carry not just the fruits of your ink-stained labor, but something altogether rarer. A relic, or at least something close enough to pass as one if you tell the story right. It's a carved wooden cross, said to contain a splinter from the staff of Saint Brendan himself. Whether it's authentic is not your business. Your job is to deliver it with conviction, an arched brow, and ideally a few poetic turns of phrase about the sea and divine providence as you walk the muddy road eastward, past hedgerows and half-burned villages still licking their wounds from last season's raids. You begin to practice your sales pitch under your breath, a blessed shard of the navigator's own stave, preserved in the breath of prayer and ocean wind. You pause. Too dramatic. Try again. An heirloom of holy travel, passed from monk to monk like bread among brethren. Better. This now is your life. A shuffling blend of scripture, street theater, and subtle haggling. You've become something like a traveling monk merchant, hawking divine literature and occasionally divine fiction, all in pursuit of more pages, more ink, more knowledge to trap between the bindings of a sheep's former backside. The first abbey you reach is wary. The gatekeeper squints at your bare feet like they might carry fleas across his threshold. You are shown to a corner near the stables, given watery porridge, and told that the abbot will consider your presence. You nod and wait, knowing this dance well. They test your patience before testing your Latin. It's a power game, and your best move is always to remain slightly amused. By nightfall, you are summoned. Abbot Remigius is fatter than expected, with eyebrows like wilted squirrels and a voice like someone gargling soup while delivering a homily. He doesn't rise when you enter. Instead, he gestures toward the table, where 3 volumes lie open like napping cats. You recognize one instantly. Cassiodorus's commentary on the Psalms, though this copy is shockingly pristine. He watches your eyes move, then clears his throat. "You've brought something?" he asks. You nod, unsling the satchel, and carefully place the wooden cross on the table, unwrapping it as though it might blink at him. The abbot peers closer, not touching it. "And you say this is Brendan's?" "I say it was his," you reply gently, "and that it has passed through more prayers than spoons in a monastery kitchen." He snorts, but you can tell he's interested. A monk appears with wine, which you both ignore. The abbot slides a scroll across the table, Greek, judging by the curling script, and says, "For that, I might part with one." You shake your head. 2, 1.5, 2 and a blessing from your chapel. Deal. And just like that, the trade is struck. No blood oath, no choir of angels, just the solemn clink of fingers against papyrus, the murmuring of monks whose whole lives revolve around who holds which copy of which treatise on which obscure theological concept. You tug the new scrolls into your cloak and bow low, not out of reverence, but balance. One scroll tries to escape down your leg. Later that night, as you sleep in a loft above the goat pen, again, you reflect on the oddity of it all. That in a world teetering between feudal chaos and divine pretense, the true currency is not silver or salt, but syllables. Lines of ink traveling from trembling hands in one abbey to another, carried on backs like yours, across rivers, over mountains, through storms and petty wars and fleas. You're not a warrior, nor a noble, nor even particularly memorable. But you're a vessel for words. A barefoot diplomat in a world stitched together by scripture and sandals. And in this strange, quiet economy, you're not poor. You're rich in letters, swollen with pages. And in the morning, you'll walk again. You rise early again, as you always do, not because the sun calls you, for it is still lazily hidden behind a veil of fog and distant bells, but because your back is done negotiating with straw, and your ankles ache to move, and because the world of monastic exchange waits for no slow monk, not even one with ink in his veins and pages in his soul. Your breath comes out in little clouds as you make your way down the steep path from the abbey. The scrolls from Abbot Remigius, tightly rolled and tucked under your arm, each one bound in a linen sleeve like a sacred limb, cradled as carefully as if it could cry out. By midday, the road bends sharply and descends into a valley where vineyards stretch like tired arms, and in the hazy distance, the tiled roofs of yet another abbey glint faintly, catching stray sunbeams between the cypress trees. But this one feels different before you even arrive, and not in the way that whispers of danger. More like the quiet suspicion that these monks might care more about how their sandals match than how straight their margins are. You trudge up the gravel path to their gate, and a young monk greets you, his face soft and pink, like it's never seen hunger or doubt. His robe is spotless, his sandals are too clean, his fingers are uncalloused, and you already know he hasn't copied more than a psalm or two in his life. You nod in greeting and introduce yourself the way you always do. Name, Abbey, the road behind you, the parchment ahead. He bows, then hesitates. We don't usually receive Irish, he says, as if the word itself might be contagious. You smile, showing all your teeth, some of them mossy with travel. I'm not here to receive. I'm here to give, and maybe to read. Inside, the abbey is too polished. The walls are painted with saints who look suspiciously like local nobles, and the refectory smells of spices you haven't tasted in years. Their scriptorium is neat, lacking the chaos of a real workshop, missing that familiar scent of vellum and burnt oil. These monks, you begin to suspect, are more concerned with how their texts look than what they actually say. Their gospels are gilded, yes, but the calligraphy is rigid, almost soulless. Their illuminations are more floral than theological. You point at one page adorned with vines and deer prancing around St. John the Baptist. He looks like he's on holiday, you say. The monk doesn't laugh. Over dinner, baked onions, some kind of cheese that refuses to melt, and a thin wine that promises more than it delivers. You're seated next to their prior, a pale man with hands too smooth for a life of binding spines. He asks what you've brought, and you unwrap the smallest scroll, the Greek one, hoping to impress. He squints. Greek? Yes, you reply patiently. A treatise on the nature of the soul. Abbot Remigius traded it for a fragment of our relic collection. The prior raises a brow, unimpressed. We prefer Latin here, of course. You nod. But it doesn't hurt to read sideways now and then. It's not long before the conversation turns awkward. They ask if you've considered adopting Roman sandals for dignity. You reply that dignity lies in humility, and humility starts at the toes. They mention how barbaric Irish letters appear, those unshrill curls, one monk mutters. You smile, knowingly. You should see our capitals. They could charm the devil into prayer. Eventually, they stop trying to correct you and shift instead to silent suspicion, which is somehow more exhausting. But you're used to it. You've been called worse than Barefoot. And in your pack, you carry something they don't even realize they need. A pocket-sized codex of beads' histories, copied in your own neat hand, with careful glosses in Old Irish, that you know they can't read, but that you know they'll want. One's curiosity overcomes pride. By candlelight, you leaf through one of their manuscripts. Flashy, yes, but sloppy in its rush to impress. Their illumination of the Nativity includes a shepherd wearing a fur cloak that looks suspiciously like a king's robe. And the ox appears to be smiling. Do your cows often grin during childbirth scenes? You ask a nearby novice. He doesn't know whether to laugh or apologize, so he pretends to sneeze. But still, despite their clean hands and spotless sandals, they're not unkind. They feed you. They offer a warm bed. They even show interest in one of your bindings, asking where you learned to do the braided leather edge so tightly. You tell them the truth. A drunk monk in Brittany taught you while hiccuping verses from the Vulgate. What emerges is something unexpected. A quiet alliance. One of their scribes, an older man named Leontius, invites you to his cell. It's cramped and smells like wet stone and rosemary. He shows you a little stash of hidden texts. Greek, yes, and some in a dialect of Coptic you don't recognize. He confesses he's been collecting them in secret. They don't approve, he mutters. They say it muddies the doctrine. You nod. Doctrine's like wine. A little sediment never hurt. He grins. It's the first real smile you've seen all day. By the time you leave, the monks haven't changed their minds about your feet, your script, or your fondness for mixing glosses in odd tongues. But they have slipped you a small manuscript, unmarked, that contains several homilies by a preacher you've only ever heard about in whispers. You tuck it deep into your cloak, where it rests beside the Greek scroll, the dried apples, and a feather quill that now bends slightly to the left. The road ahead is quieter. The sandals behind you echo faintly in your memory, like a warning bell wrapped in silk. And you think to yourself, not for the first time, that being misunderstood is simply part of the journey. Especially when you walk it barefoot. The path you've chosen next, narrow and bristling with thistle, winds toward a valley where the wind always seems to be whispering someone's secrets, brushing against your ears like half-heard confessions. And in this strange part of the countryside, neither quite Italy nor fully Francia, you begin to notice something that has always been there, but now begins to pulse stronger with each mile. Books are not simply copied anymore. They are being hidden, stashed away like treasure beneath floorboards, behind walls, and even once inside a hollowed-out loaf of stale bread that some monk swears nobody would dare to eat because the crust has become harder than his own conscience. It begins with whispers at the taverns you pass when seeking shelter, whispered not in drunken boasts, but in hushed tones over weak ale and old bread. Have you heard? Someone murmurs. They burned a library in the north, claimed heresy in the margins. And suddenly, you remember all those little doodles you and your brothers drew. Angels with oddly human faces, saints with overly wide smiles, and dragons curling behind scripture. None of it heretical, but certainly not solemn. You arrive at an abbey nestled in a chestnut grove, its stone walls more grey than holy, as if the building itself has tired of being sacred and simply wishes to be left alone. The prior greets you with cautious kindness and doesn't ask about your bare feet, which you consider a blessing or perhaps an omen. You are shown to their scriptorium, and there, amidst the usual scent of ink and sheep glue, you see it. An entire stack of codices resting beneath a bench, loosely covered by an old wool cloak that smells of mice and cloves. You lift one gently, and the script dances across the page, not in Latin, not in Greek, but in an older tongue, curved and ornate. Celtic, you ask? The monk nods, whispering, "We keep what we can." Even if we're told not to, it's then that it becomes clear. In this corner of Europe, books are not merely preserved. They are protected, like aging monarchs in exile, like relics too rebellious to be displayed. The monks here don't just fear ignorance. They fear the cleansing fire of politics, of popes who call for uniformity, of kings who despise ambiguity in ink. That night, over bowls of thin porridge and smoked trout, you listen to the stories. A nearby monastery was raided for sheltering unapproved texts. Another was accused of harboring dangerous interpretations of a gospel. Nothing violent, just creative. A certain bishop, it's said, declared that beauty in the margins breeds madness in the soul, and ordered that all decorated manuscripts be scraped and rewritten with plain hands. You shiver, not from the cold, but from the thought of your own abbey's pages being scrubbed of color, stripped of laughter. You offer your own news in return. Tales of abbots who trade pages like relics, who risk their positions to keep Greek alive, who still dare to footnote in Irish, even if few understand it anymore. The monks around you listen, wide-eyed, as if you're telling stories of saints who drink wine from snail shells and dance in circles to chase off sin. One even asks if you'll read aloud from the gospel copy you carry, and you do. Your voice slow and steady, your accent thick, but somehow soothing, like moss covering stone. Later, one of the novices, a thin, pale boy with fingers stained blue from poorly mixed ink, guides you down a narrow stone staircase behind the chapel. He carries no torch. "You must see," he says. The passage opens into a low chamber, its ceiling barely taller than your shoulders. Inside, books are stacked along every wall, their bindings crumbling, their pages discolored, their language sometimes unintelligible. And yet, they breathe. You can feel it. The quiet hum of accumulated memory, of scribes who dared to add a line in their own tongue, of margins that carried drawings of birds no longer seen and prayers half written in fear. One volume catches your eye. A psalter bound in what looks like eel skin. The writing inside a mix of Latin and a strange pictorial code. The novice shrugs. Nobody's cracked it yet, but we keep it because we think it's kind. You don't question the logic. In this place, kindness is as good a reason as divinity. When you leave, the abbot gives you a thin codex wrapped in oilcloth. "Don't open it until you're far," he warns, "and don't let anyone see it unless you trust their soul." You tuck it beneath your robes, feeling its quiet weight against your ribs, the pulse of every unknown page thudding softly against your chest, as if the book itself were afraid of being forgotten. The road from the valley is steep and wet. Your toes slide over moss and rock. But you feel strangely light, as if the book has given you permission to keep walking. The mist returns, cloaking the trees, muting the bird calls, and you feel, not for the first time, like a messenger from a forgotten world. One where pages bloom instead of wilt, where ink stains are holy, and where even the silent letters in a hidden library might one day find their voice again. As you settle down to sleep that night beneath a tree older than your grandfather's sins, the oilcloth bundle rests against your side. You do not open it, but you do whisper to it. "I'll keep you safe," you promise, even if the margins get scraped. You wake with a stiff neck, a layer of dew on your robe, and the faint smell of damp leaves mingling with the quiet exhale of your own breath, which hangs in the morning air like a ghost, reluctant to return to silence. The hidden book, still wrapped in oilcloth, presses against your ribs like a second heartbeat. And as you shift beneath the gnarled tree roots, you imagine the script inside, lines upon lines of inked thought, possibly heretical, possibly misunderstood, but certainly precious, humming just beneath the surface of your quiet journey, like a psalm, half remembered in sleep. Your body is tired, your joints creak like old hinges, and your feet, calloused beyond recognition, seem to protest every pebble on the road. Yet still you rise, still you walk, because now, more than ever, the rhythm of writing has fused with your breath, and each step feels like punctuation in a sentence far longer than your life will ever be. Your destination is uncertain, but your direction is clear. Onward, always towards someone who still values pages over politics. Someone who understands that margin doodles no matter how playful or strange, carried just as much soul as a chorus of saints. Along the next bend, nestled between wind-bent trees and lichen-covered rocks, you stumble upon a way station, a crooked hut turned into a makeshift scriptorium by 3 monks who speak little, laugh often, and smell vaguely of turnips and lamp oil. They welcome you without question, and soon your hands are stained with ink once again. The table before you, littered with scraps of parchment, sharpened quills, and the occasional smudge of boiled blackberry dye, used in place of proper pigment. One of the monks, a bent old fellow with 2 remaining teeth and a tendency to hum while writing, shows you a new technique, mixing ash with wine to create a deeper hue, a trick passed down by a scribe who claimed to have met a Roman ghost in a dream. You spend days here, not because you must, but because it feels like breathing, to be among those who write, not for gold or fame, but for the sheer weight of memory. Together, you copy fragments of lost texts, some in Latin, others in Old Irish, and a few in a language none of you can identify. One that curls and loops like smoke in the wind. It might be nonsense, the humming monk chuckles, but beautiful nonsense deserves to survive too. At night, by the flicker of tallow candles, you take out the oilcloth bundle. You haven't opened it since the day you received it. But tonight, as rain taps gently against the mossy roof and distant thunder rolls like a sleeping god, you unfold the layers and reveal the codex inside. It is slimmer than expected, with worn corners and faded ink, but as you run your fingers across the cover, you feel something familiar. The gentle curve of marginalia, the soft scratch of curiosity etched into every page. You read? Slowly at first, then with growing awe. This book, it isn't a gospel or a psalter, it's a diary, written by an unnamed monk, perhaps Irish like yourself, who had traveled even farther than you, who had crossed not just kingdoms, but doubts, fears, small rebellions, and large silences. His writing is fluid, uncertain in places, but always honest, recording hunger, loneliness, the joy of finding a scrap of parchment in a burnt-out chapel, the comfort of a cat sleeping on his lap as he wrote by starlight. One entry strikes you harder than the rest. Sometimes, I think the only real sin is letting a word die. You close the book, not to forget it, but to let it settle in you, like a prayer, like an ink stain you refuse to wipe away. The next morning, you share the diary with the others. They read it with reverence, eyes wide, heads bowed, not out of piety, but out of respect for a voice long gone that still knows how to whisper. You make a copy together, line by line, even preserving the doodles in the margins. A bird with too many wings, a monk with comically large feet, a single tear beside the word, solitude. Before you leave, you bury a copy beneath the floorboards, wrapped in wax cloth and sealed in a wooden box, once used for pickled onions. Future monks, you mutter, may your onions be wisdom. Then you walk again. The road is wet and long. Your knees ache more than before. And sometimes you forget what day it is, or which saint you're supposed to be emulating this week. But none of it matters. Not really, because you've begun to realize that being a scribe isn't just about preserving the past. It's about leaving breadcrumbs in the dark for someone else to find. As you pass through a village where children throw pine cones and ask if you're a wizard, you say yes. A woman hands you a crust of bread and a small note, folded and hidden beneath it. It reads, "We remember you. Keep writing." There's no name, just a smudge of wax and a drawing of a single ink droplet. You don't cry, because tears are a luxury in these winds, but you do walk straighter, carry your satchel a little closer, and hum a psalm the rest of the day. The words are half forgotten, but the rhythm is familiar, like footsteps over vellum, or the soft scrape of a quill against silence. You are not lost. You are not done. There is still more to copy, still more to carry, still more words to save. The sun has not yet risen, but the sky has begun to blush with that faint suggestion of warmth behind the thin mist clinging to the hills, as if the land itself is reluctant to wake fully, just like you. Sitting on a damp stone with aching legs wrapped in your threadbare wool cloak, pressing your cold fingers to your knees and whispering a half-prayer, half-lament that sounds less like devotion and more like the groggy muttering of someone who's slept far too little and walked far too long. You're old now. Not so old that people treat you like relic, but old enough that every bend in the road creaks through your bones, and the calluses on your feet have become almost comical in their thickness. So much so that even thorns simply bounce off them like bad jokes. You have outlived most of your companions, and the memories of their faces, their voices, the way Brother Kieran used to snore like a rusted bellows, all come to you now as you set out once more, cradling your last manuscript as if it were an infant swaddled in vellum and centuries of silence. This journey is different. It feels heavier, though the book is small, just a modest collection of prayers, copied by your own hand, illuminated with trembling strokes and colored with the last dregs of pigments you managed to brew from moss and leftover wine. The recipient is a new abbey, one just founded in the mountains east of the Rhine, and they requested this gift, an Irish-style prayer book, to begin their own scriptorium, a humble symbol of connection. You could have sent it by courier, yes, but how could you? How could you entrust such a thing to someone who might not understand that this book is not just text, but breath, memory, and the last good thing you might leave behind? And so you walk. The days blur together, like ink smeared by careless hands. Fields of barley shimmering in wind like silent waves. Villages that greet you with raised eyebrows and cautious smiles. And once, a dog that follows you for 2 days before disappearing at the edge of a forest, as if it simply remembered something more important elsewhere. You eat what is given. Dry cheese, hard bread, apples with wormholes you carefully cut around. You sleep where you must. Under trees, inside barns, or, if the abbot is generous, in the corner of a guest house, next to an unused lectern and a pile of unsorted scrolls. At night, your dreams grow strange. You see the first manuscript you ever touched, its letters glowing gold, floating above a fire. And behind it, Brother Aud, who died 40 winters ago, smiles and says, "Write faster, or the sheep will eat the psalms." You wake laughing, your breath white in the cold air, and you wonder if your mind is slipping or simply learning how to make its own poetry. One day, As you're crossing a narrow pass, a storm rolls in with such suddenness that even the goats look offended. You seek shelter in the lee of a rock and wrap yourself in your cloak, holding the manuscript beneath your robes, the damp creeping up through the hem like a warning. For hours you sit, eyes half-lidded, reciting psalms just to keep your tongue from stiffening, until at last the clouds break and a shaft of light spills down the mountain like a golden ribbon leading you onward. You take it as a sign, not because you believe in such things necessarily, but because belief is often the only tool left when your bones forget what trust feels like. Finally, the abbey appears. Not grand or ornate, but modest, like a child's drawing of what a sacred place should be. Its stones are still new, its walls clean, and the monks look young, ridiculously young, with smooth faces and eager eyes that make you feel like some ancient turtle crawling ashore from a forgotten sea. They greet you with reverence, though you shake your head and mumble something about just an old scribe with tired feet. And when they ask to see the book, you hand it over slowly, with the same care you might give a newborn. They gather around it as though it were a relic, and one even touches the illumination of St. Brendan's boat, with a finger trembling not from cold, but awe. You are given a bed, a warm meal, a clean robe, and for the first time in years, you don't wake in the night reaching for a quill, or coughing from damp air, or checking to see if the book is still beneath your head. You sleep deeply, entirely, like a word finally finding its punctuation. In the morning, one of the young monks brings you a parchment and a quill, and asks with hesitation if you might teach them how to make their own inks from local plants. You do. And then, without being asked, you begin to show them how to space their letters, how to breathe while writing, how not to scratch too hard, lest the vellum tear like a poorly chosen metaphor. You speak more in those 2 days than you have in the last 2 months, and when you stop, it is only because your voice cracks with age, not unwillingness. On the 3rd morning, you ask to see the manuscript one last time. It's already on a lectern in the chapel, open to the page of the Beatitudes, the gold leaf reflecting the soft light from the high windows. You nod. You say nothing. You know this will be your last journey. Not in the dramatic sense of collapsing at the doorstep or vanishing in a burst of holy light, but in the quiet, aching way that your knees groan as you kneel for prayer, and the way your breath doesn't quite reach your ribs when you climb the steps. Your fingers are slower now, your handwriting unsteady, but your mind still knows the rhythm of words, the weight of meaning, and the joy of leaving something behind that might survive you. So you ask for one last sheet of parchment, one last quill, and you write. Not a sermon, not a translation, not even a psalm. Just a short note. I carried this book so that others might read. I walked so that words might stay alive. If you're reading this, keep copying, keep walking, even barefoot. You fold it, leave it tucked beneath the manuscript. Then you step into the garden where the late summer wind smells of thyme and apples, and you sit in the sun, face tilted skyward, heart filled not with pride, but with a quiet certainty that ink, not blood, has been your truest legacy. By now, you no longer wake to bells or birdsong. You wake to stillness, the kind that sinks into the joints before your mind remembers the shape of your body. The younger monks tread lightly around you, half in reverence, half in concern, as though your bones might dissolve into dust if startled too quickly. You sit longer at meals, chewing slowly, listening to their chatter about grammar, pigments, and the weather patterns that shape the abbey's gardens, nodding gently, even when you're unsure what they've said. You don't speak as much anymore, not out of reluctance, but because the world seems to speak to you in quieter tones now, in rustling leaves, the distant clatter of a dropped cup, the soft brush of a breeze tugging your sleeve like a whisper from the divine. Your fingers no longer grasp the quill with certainty, though the memory of writing, of the ink pooling in the grooves of a capital letter, of the moment when a perfect line of script meets the edge of the margin, is still with you. They've given you a place at the scriptorium's edge where you can sit and watch, occasionally offering a nod or a raised brow when someone forgets to rule the page before beginning. Once or twice you've startled a novice by muttering the correct Latin word while half asleep, correcting their tense without opening your eyes. They say your snoring now includes whispered conjugations, as though your very dreams are stuck in declension. The book you brought is now part of their daily readings. You often see it being carried, reverently, from chapel to scriptorium and back again, handled as if it were a relic. You don't correct them. You don't say that it was made with tired hands and makeshift ink, that you nearly dropped it into a river 3 times, or that the red pigment on the opening page was mixed with leftover wine and a prayer of desperation. No, you let them believe it is perfect, because in some way it is. Then one morning, as the frost begins to return to the grass, and your breath becomes visible with every sigh, your body tells you something your mind already suspects. That this life is beginning to close like a manuscript after the final word is penned. You don't fear it. If anything, you feel a kind of completion, as if all your walking, copying, fasting, and silent devotion have led to this moment, not of glory or recognition, but of peaceful surrender. You lie on your cot, wrapped in the same worn cloak you brought from Ireland decades ago, the fibers smelling faintly of peat and old ink. The last thing you hear is the turning of pages, not metaphorically, but literally. One of the young scribes sits beside you, reading softly from your own manuscript. You don't understand the words anymore. Your ears receive only the rhythm. But that's enough. That's more than enough. And so, like the closing line of a well-crafted psalm, you exhale. Wind down, approximate 400 words. Now, as you breathe slower, as the stories drift to their close like parchment, curling at the corners with age, allow your mind to settle into stillness. You've walked far, barefoot, through fog and field, across frost and flame, through abbey doors and mountain passes. You've turned pages, not just with your fingers, but with your whole being. Each word you've copied, echoing silently through the halls of time, waiting patiently to be read again, to be remembered. Imagine the weight of that manuscript still resting against your chest, its spine warmed by your heartbeat, its vellum pages trembling gently as the wind rustles the monastery garden. Hear the scratch of a quill from some distant room, the muffled laughter of monks debating which Latin declension fits best, the flicker of a candle in a stone alcove that has not seen daylight in generations. And now picture that little Irish abbey where you were born, not born in body perhaps, but born into words, into purpose. Its walls of mossy stone still stand, weathered yet firm, and in its library sits one more copy of the same prayer book you carried halfway across the world. Somewhere, even now, a novice bends over it by lamplight, tracing the letters you once carved into existence with stiff fingers and devotion that outlasted the pain. You do not need to walk anymore. You do not need to copy anymore. Others carry your journey forward. Others keep the ink flowing, the books alive. You were a bridge, and now that bridge is strong enough for others to cross. So breathe gently. Let the journey fade behind you, not in darkness, but in golden light, like the gilded edge of an illuminated page, just before the book is closed for the night. Sleep now, little scribe. You've written enough for today. End of script. Sweet dreams.